Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Mental Architecture, Building the Mind One Moment at a Time. I'm Howard Blumenfeld, and I'm the author of the book, which you can buy on Amazon at a discount during COVID-19. It's only 99 cents on Kindle and $14.99 for the paperback version. So today we're going to move into chapter 5. The chapter title is No Normal. And what that chapter is about is just the fact that it's pretty silly to apply labels to people, even though humans are hardwired to do that. There's just too many different ways that people change and just too much variety to really be able to stick somebody with a label. And we'll start off with the first section, which is discrimination. We'll talk about the different ways in which people discriminate against each other and how that could be quite harmful. So you hear people say all the time, gosh, why couldn't that person be a little bit more normal? They're not acting normal. What do people mean by that? So we all have our own idea of what normal is, or what like an average person is. But let's go to the first place that anybody reasonable would go, and that's the dictionary. So I'm going to give you two definitions of the word normal from the Merriam-Webster dictionary. First definition is conforming to a type, standard, or regular pattern. And then the other definition is of, relating to, or characterized by average intelligence or development, free from mental illness, mentally sound. I'll never forget one of the most insulting things that someone ever said to me as a kid when I was over their house was that there's nothing special about you, Howard. You're pretty average. You're smart, but you're not that smart. And just hearing that was just very insulting and degrading. And I think it stuck with me through the years to get me to this point where I wanted to write about it. Conforming to some social standard. Now, first of all, there are thousands and thousands of different social standards. So if you were to choose one of them, like say at the workplace, people are supposed to act professional. We all know what acting professional is like. Then I guess it would be considered normal to act professional, but abnormal if you don't. And acting normal isn't always a healthy thing to do. Sometimes it can lead to boredom and monotony and inauthenticity. People who try to act too normal all the time may not be being themselves. They're trying to act like somebody else or fit into some kind of stereotype or social class. And the other thing too about intelligence, and I've written up on this extensively and we'll talk about it in a later chapter, but the whole idea that intelligence can be normalized is ridiculous. And in the United States, we tend to, and throughout the world, we tend to vary scholastic intelligence, the ability to do well in school and do well on tests and intellectualize. But we don't really give a lot of credit to the intelligence required to be successful at the trades, or the intelligence required to be a mother or a father, or just to even just get on in society. It takes a good degree of intelligence just to survive, just to do basic things. But that's not what most people consider to be intelligent. Normal intelligence is some kind of score on an exam. Normal intelligence means that you have certain mathematical and English or other language skills, but that couldn't be further from the truth. So intelligence really doesn't have a good definition, first of all. And the idea that you could be normally intelligent or socially normal, it's just a big fallacy. There really is no such thing. We kind of understand where the idea that someone could be a normal or average comes from. We have to kind of go all the way back to race. And we go around labeling people by race, whether we're being discriminatory or trying to be discriminatory or not. Just labeling someone that way is a form of discrimination. We can use that discrimination in a positive way to bring about social change and social justice reforms for minorities that have been historically oppressed. But I want to take it a step even further than that and go and dig a little bit deeper into just the history of race. Why do we look at people and look at them by the color of their skin? Why do we try to normalize that and say that person's white, that person's black, that person's this or that? That's such a big lie that we could even call a person white or black to begin with. We might identify as being white or black or any of the other number of colors that are found in the skin, But the truth is that everybody's skin is made up of many different colors and shades, and it would be actually impossible to label them accurately. So I want to share a quote with you. So according to author Simon Worrell, the characteristics of normal human variation we use to determine broad social categories of a race, such as Black, Asian, or white, are mostly things like skin color, morphological features, or hair texture, and those are all biologically encoded. Race really ignores the sheer amount of genetic and biological and environmental variability that every individual has. If we were to look at ourselves genetically, we would find we have a lot more in common than meets the eye. All of our genetic origins can be traced back to 4 different main sets of ancestors, including the Neanderthals, Homo sapiens, and the Denisovians, and there's some evidence of a potential 4th ancestor as well. And when you look at that, it's quite remarkable at how many different things that really we have in common, yet how people tend to just, instead of focusing on the things we have in common, people tend to focus on the things that are different. And I mean, it's kind of a double-edged sword. We don't want everybody in society to be the same, or we end up with something like a scene out of Aldous Huxley's Brave New World. We don't want ardent automatons, but at the same time, we want to be able to celebrate people's diversity. So it's really important to acknowledge the diversity, but also to be able to see it in a positive light and not just use it as a weapon. And that's unfortunate, because if you look at what's going on right now in society, we have some of the biggest racial division we've had since the civil rights movement even began many years ago. And I want to read you something else from my book that I wrote about racism. Racist attitudes are not a result of genetics. People develop racist thoughts and patterns mostly out of fear and ignorance. Rather than try to understand another's socioeconomic or cultural conditions, they build blanket statements and judgments about them to avoid interaction or feelings of inferiority. Unfortunately, these feelings can become validated in the collective and lead to civil violence, discrimination, and condemnation. Once formed, prejudices can be difficult to overcome and lead to toxic alienation and feelings of hatred. Racism and bigotry become the social norms in these communities and lead to an environment of exclusivity and isolation. Now, the frustrating thing is that as humans, we're wired for discrimination. We have to be able to discriminate amongst objects and even amongst people in order to survive. There's almost like a cult-like behavior to racism. Racism, first of all, requires social validation. I'm not saying that an individual can't be racist by themselves, but the whole idea of racism comes from a collective view, a socially accepted view of what's considered normal and what's not within a certain social group. And so there's almost like a certain, like I said, cult-like behavior to it, where everybody follows the herd and discriminates against the minority because they feel like their racial group or social group is superior to the other one. And that is really unfortunate, but that is how our society has ended up so divided through this matter. Certain groups feel like they're superior to others, and there's just more of them than, or better opportunities for that group than there is for the other group. And so the minorities lose. And that's why we need social justice reform. Racism doesn't have to be overt, doesn't have to be bold. Nearly everyone commits some form of racism or another through microaggressions. Microaggressions are largely subconscious beliefs that an individual harbors that cause them to have certain feelings or reactions towards others without even realizing that they're discriminating. So to give you an example, I'll go from one that's in my book. Let's suppose you were a white cashier working at a convenience store, and you grew up in a predominantly white suburban neighborhood, and then you had some inner city Hispanic kids come inside, and just their presence, you kind of maybe shrieked a little bit inside, and that shrieking inside, or maybe talk to them just a little bit differently, even though in your eyes you see them as equal to anybody else, that's a very subtle but still harmful form of a microaggression, where just because of a person's skin color or some kind of subconscious attitudes or beliefs that you might have, you will actually treat that person differently just for that reason, whether you intend to or not. And so this is why it's really important to be educated about civility and educated about civil rights and civil rights discourse. Other microaggressions may not have anything to do with race. People with disabilities experience microaggressions from people who may think that they're trying to help them. I'll give you a perfect example. Somebody who's in a wheelchair may not want you to open the door for them because it might make them feel weak. And I know that seems like kind of a strange idea, like I'm trying to do a nice thing for this person by holding the door open, but you don't know how that's going to come across to them. So, it's always a better idea just to ask, would you like some help, instead of just making assumptions. It's the assuming part of a microaggression that gets you in trouble. I think microaggressions can be forgivable if the person has an open mind and is willing to change their attitudes and beliefs in the way that they treat people. And there's other forms of microaggressions that you can have too. For instance, if you're a doctor, let's say an anesthesiologist or something, and you've gone to medical school for a really long time, you're really well studied, and then you have a plumber come to your house to fix your dishwasher, and you get in a conversation with them about heart health, maybe about exercise, and the plumber starts talking, and you can tell, okay, they're not as knowledgeable about the heart as you are, because you're a doctor, of course, but in your head, you start judging them silently, like, gosh, they don't know anything. They're so stupid. And you may not come out and say those things. You may still be very polite and nice, but you're exhibiting microaggressions towards their intelligence. The plumber is very intelligent. It's just that they have a different form of intelligence, not an academic form of intelligence or a medical form of intelligence. I'm pretty sure the anesthesiologist who is criticizing them in their heads would appear pretty stupid to them if they were trying to fix their dishwasher the way that the plumber was, because they don't have that trade or technical knowledge. And microaggressions don't have to be unidirectional. They can be bidirectional. Microaggressions are part of everyday conversations and interactions. For instance, let's say that you were a waiter working at a restaurant and a really, really wealthy customer came in. You knew that this person's wealthy. They're dressed really well. They sit down, they order. There can be microaggressions from the cashier to the wealthy customer and from the wealthy customer to the cashier that cause some uncomfortable interactions. The wealthy customer might make assumptions about the waiter that aren't true. And that could take on all kinds of different forms, like maybe the way the waiter talks, maybe tattoos on their arms or piercings or things like that the wealthy individual finds off-putting because of the way that they grew up. And then the waiter may find the wealthy person off-putting with how formal their language is and how they're ordering so much stuff and almost like appear to be flaunting their wealth. And they make assumptions that rich people must act a certain way. Or even, let's just say the person came in dressed really nice. That person might just, the waiter might just decide that person's a wealthy individual, even if they're not. We make assumptions about the economic status or socioeconomic status of people all the time, just based on how they dress, how they look, how they talk. And those are microaggressions. Truth is, we don't know anything about these people. Microaggressions that are bidirectional can happen, especially when you go traveling to a different country. In America, giving a thumbs up gesture means good job, well done. But in different countries, a thumbs up gesture might mean something insulting. And as a tourist, you might not know that. And then the person you're insulting is going to take offense to you and think, stupid American, which is a microaggression of their own. They're not getting the time to understand why you might have done that or who you are. And by you putting a thumbs up gesture in there, doing a thumbs up gesture in their country, you're also not really respecting their culture. You didn't do the research ahead of time to see what kinds of gestures in that culture are acceptable, which ones aren't. So one of the biggest hallmarks of discrimination and microaggressions is assumptions. So making assumptions and assuming things. When you assume, you make an ass out of you and me. That's something, quote from The Odd Couple, an old movie. So I'll leave you with a story from a professor by the name of Beverly Flaxington, who talked about this married couple who had a real big disagreement over something really stupid. And I'm sure if you're in a relationship, any kind of committed relationship, you could probably relate to this. So in this relationship, the wife gave the husband a shopping list that was numbered off. And when the husband went to the store, went shopping, and he assumed that the numbers meant the number of items of each thing that he was supposed to pick up. So he picked up multiple items off the shopping list and then came home, and his wife was really pissed at him because he had way more items than what she sent him out for. Those numbers just simply meant pick up this first, that second, this third, that fourth, and so on. But he interpreted it to mean quantities. So they both made assumptions. She made assumptions that her husband would automatically know that that was a numbered list. And he made assumptions that what she wanted off the list was a certain number of quantities of each item. So they both committed an act of willful ignorance in a way by not asking the question. The husband should have asked the wife, is this a numbered list, or did you want me to pick up like 10 of these things? And the wife shouldn't have just assumed that her husband would automatically know what she meant when she wrote the list out. And so that's a really kind of silly example, but these kinds of conflicts happen all the time in relationships when people make assumptions, which is why it's so important to learn how to communicate in relationships. But you can extrapolate this even all the way back to the beginning of this discussion, talking about racism. I think racism from one group to another, or even discrimination based on gender identity, sexual orientation, or any other number of things, is really based off of people making assumptions towards other people and groups of people. And if those groups could just break the barriers down and break the walls down and learn to educate themselves about the other group, then I think there wouldn't be any of these civil rights discussions to the extent that we've needed to have them, because we wouldn't have minorities being constantly oppressed. We would have minorities integrating into society with other groups of people, and everybody would be mutually educated about each other, and so it would be a lot easier to live in harmony. I mean, we have plenty of neighborhoods and institutions in America where people get along from, the United States in itself is a huge melting pot. So, racism is not necessarily everywhere, but wherever it is, it's a huge problem. It's a wall, it's a barrier. And I think that one of the things that we need to teach people to do from a young age is how to discriminate based on healthy factors, and how to learn about the microaggressions that you may be developing or may have been taught to you, acknowledge them, recognize them, and move past them so that you don't act differently towards other people for superficial reasons. We will always discriminate as humans. There's no way we won't. It's built into our brains. If you've looked at the previous 4 chapters of my book and in my videos, it's all about discrimination, object discrimination. Not discrimination amongst people, but discrimination among objects. Well, guess what? People are objects. They're moving objects of flesh. And so we're hardwired to discriminating. But we don't have to discriminate in a bad way. We can discriminate with curiosity. We can ask people questions about their upbringing and be sensitive to questions that they may not want to answer. It's much better to be curious than it is to make assumptions and throw walls up and try to use those insecurities to beat people away. So we're going to talk more about how to develop meaningful relationships in the next video. But this is the opener is discrimination, which ties in with the other kinds of discrimination, like I said, amongst objects from earlier chapters. Now we're moving to talking about discrimination amongst people. But in order to develop meaningful relationships, we have to be able to communicate with people, and we need to be able to acknowledge the assumptions that we have and be willing to kind of put those to bed, put them away, and learn about the assumptions that others make about us and how those can be pretty unhealthy. And that's where you just have to kind of put your walls down and sit down with somebody and really get to know them. So I look forward to talking to you more about that next week. In the meantime, thank you for joining me for this video. And I would really appreciate it if you would subscribe below, if you're not already subscribed to this channel, like and comment. And I hope everybody has a really great day. Thank you very much. Take care.